The world of boxing is about to change forever. Over the past couple of years, Saudi Arabia has become a worldwide sports attraction center. It's where boxing got a fresh start, and for the first time in 25 years, the industry finally crowned an undisputed heavyweight champion. For a quarter of a century, multiple champions from 4 competing belt organizations failed to agree on a unification fight until one man changed everything. Turki Alalshikh, the most influential figure in combat sports today, stepped into the game. A passionate boxing fan and representative of the world's wealthiest royal family, he has poured time, effort, and billions from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund into making long-awaited super fights a reality. But that wasn't enough for Turkey. The Saudis didn't just want to host events under the Alphabet Boys. They wanted to create their own league. A league of the best with proper weight classes, rankings, and an almost unlimited budget. And to pull off such a massive project, Turkey brought in the biggest boxing fan on the planet.
What's up, everybody? Boxing, 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 boxing.
A man who knows the fight game inside and out, who has consistently criticized the boxing industry for its mistakes, and who's an absolute mastermind at crafting money in combat sports.
Okay, so you buy it for $2 million. It's worth what now?
Now?
Yeah.
13 billion.
Okay. Okay. That's a good return.
However, this flashy duo has way more contradictions than it seems at first glance. And those same contradictions could end up pushing boxing not toward the much-needed revolution everyone's hoping for, but deeper into chaos. More corruption, more politics, and an even bigger disconnect with the fans. I'm Ruslan, and we've got a lot to unpack, so buckle up! What the combat sports industry has been talking about all last year has come to pass. The Saudis are shifting away from merely collaborating with other promotions as tournament organizers and establishing their own boxing league with Dana White's active assistance. Given Turkey's ambitions and resources, it seemed it was only a matter of time. However, it was also clear that boxing would appear in some form in TKO's portfolio sooner or later, as the third pillar in the holdings arsenal after MMA and wrestling. Before selling the UFC, Dana had long considered Zuffa boxing. WWE President Nick Khan also has a solid background in the industry. These two guys are taking the lead on the project. Dana will handle the day-to-day operations, while Khan will focus on the big-picture strategy. However, no one expected such harsh language toward the more recent partners and the Big Four sanctioning bodies. It can't just be blamed on the Turks' tough style anymore, because now Dana is involved. The guy who built a multi-billion-dollar empire by crushing his opponents and silencing any competition. So you can be confident that this new promotion isn't just here to participate, it's here to take over. The key point here is that the future losers of the industry, who are likely to be ousted from the market within a few years, have let the fox into their coop themselves. The organizers promised to reveal more details about the project later, but we can look at last year's New York Times article, in which insiders gave us a sneak peek at what the new boxing league could look like. There would be 12 weight classes, each with 15 fighters. Each weight class would have a single world champion belt and a crystal clear ranking system. Boxers would move up the rankings based on their performance, either getting into championship fights or getting booted from the league after a string of bad results. Sounds very familiar. Yep, the main idea is to copy and apply the super successful UFC model to boxing. Dana's team will also handle the production, so we can expect a top quality show. They've got all the infrastructure, experience, and of course, endless funding to make it happen. A strategic opportunity to reimagine the sport of boxing globally. But what does that actually mean? Boxing today operates in a messy and outdated system dating back to the early 20th century. That's when the first regulatory body was formed in the US, later splitting into 4 separate organizations. For decades, this Big Four has controlled the sport, setting the rules, ranking fighters, approving title bouts, and influencing every major decision in the industry. Right below them in boxing's power structure are the promoters who sign fighters, set up events, and handle TV deals. On paper, having multiple players in the game should mean more competition, opportunities, and better growth for both the fighters and the sport. sport. But in the boxing world, it works exactly the opposite. Each governing body hands out its own championship belt for every weight class, along with a pile of extra interim titles. The reason is simple: greed. The Alphabet Boys take a cut from every title fight, no matter how meaningful the belt actually is. Becoming the undisputed world champion, without any version of attached, means unifying all four belts. And often, the difficulty lies not so much in the fights themselves as in the process of coordination and the most severe bureaucracy that begins in negotiations between regulators, promoters, agents of fighters, broadcasters, and other interested parties. The ranking system that determines a boxer's right to a title fight also leaves much to be desired. The evaluation criteria are not unified, and if one regulator primarily takes into account the number of early wins, the other pays attention to the boxer's level of opposition, and the third generally evaluates technical skill. Subjectivity is put at the head of everything. The so-called independence of boxing regulators and their commitment to growing the sport are things of the past, if they ever truly existed at all. Corrupt rankings, favoritism toward promoters protecting their cash cow champions, shady belt legitimacy, and an endless stream of pointless interim titles that conveniently line their pockets. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. This entire system doesn't just ignore what fans actually want, it even breaks its own rules. Only in boxing can a champion dodge real challengers for years, while the regulators just look the other way. Only in boxing can negotiations for so-called dream fights drag on forever, as both sides try to squeeze out every last dollar, only for the fight to finally happen when nobody cares anymore because both fighters are past their prime. And people still complain about the UFC's monopoly in MMA? Back in the early 2000s, the US government made a serious push to clean up the sports industry, crack down on corruption, and bring more transparency to the game. That's when the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act came into play, a law designed to protect fighters, keep promoters in check, and put sanctioning bodies under government oversight. Sure, it helped cut down on some of the worst offenses and shady deals, but let's be real, boxing is still full of problems, and the system is just as messy as ever. Nah, even Dana's classic best versus best claim isn't as solid as it used to be. I'll touch on that later, but you have to admit that this kind of thing would be unthinkable in the UFC, and that's probably why MMA has been the fastest growing sport of the past 20 years, while boxing has been moving in the opposite direction. That's exactly why TV ratings for a system built around promoters and sanctioning bodies have been crashing for the past decade. And then, in late 2018, a historic moment shook the sport. HBO, the oldest premium cable network in the US, pulled the plug on boxing. For decades, HBO was the king of boxing broadcasts, taking the sports presentation to another level with expert analysis and high-quality production. They pioneered the PPV model, and when Showtime entered the boxing scene in the 80s, HBO took things even further, signing exclusive deals with top fighters and turning their events into box office juggernauts. For nearly 40 years, the rivalry between these two TV giants pumped massive money into boxing. It fueled the sport's growth, but also exposed its biggest flaws. And then, at the end of 23, history repeated itself. Showtime followed in HBO's footsteps and walked away from boxing too. Sure, a lot of viewers have shifted from traditional TV to streaming, but let's be real. The bigger issue is that interest in the product itself has been declining for years. And that brings us to the breaking point for the entire boxing industry. In 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman unveiled a massive development plan for Saudi Arabia, Vision 2030. It's based on the diversification of the Saudi economy and a significant reduction in the dependence of the country's budget on oil and gas revenues, which accounted for about half of the kingdom's GDP. Sports was among the industries in which it was planned to invest raw material proceeds. A lot of sports. But the real game changer wasn't just spending money at home, but investing globally. Beyond financial and technological returns, these moves boosted Saudi Arabia's geopolitical influence, something far more valuable than just dollars and cents. And following the successful example of his neighbors in the UAE and Qatar, Prince Salman clearly understands that the easiest way to achieve this is by turning the loyalty of a large group of sports fans into influence. The first major move was in golf, where Saudis challenged the market monopolist by creating their own league and then luring athletes away from him. Then came tennis and Formula One, where they were turned down for the first time, despite offering nearly twice the actual market value. No big deal though. Instead, they secured a major stake in McLaren. And then, it was football's turn. After buying Newcastle, Saudi Arabia set its sights on hosting the World Cup. But to strengthen its bid, the kingdom went a step further, privatizing several major league clubs and bringing in top stars worldwide. As a result, FIFA awarded them the tournament without any competition. Other bidders took one look at the situation and didn't even bother applying. Esports, cycling, athletics. At this point, it's easier to list the sports that haven't been flooded with Saudi money. But combat sports certainly stand apart here. Because unlike many billionaires who throw money at sports without really understanding them, our guy Turki is the real deal. A hardcore boxing fan deeply immersed in sports problems. Besides buying the PFL MMA promotion, Saudi Arabia has been pumping money into boxing, delivering more long-awaited super fights in the past 2 years than we've seen in the last 2 decades. Most of these boxing events were part of the annual Riyadh Season Festival, a massive project that brought together almost every top promoter in the game. For years, the Dream Fights fans wanted just weren't happening, mainly because no one could afford to make them happen. But then a new investor stepped in with unlimited funds, and of course, the promoters jumped at the chance. They made a fortune off it, but who would have guessed that that same investor would be looking to take over the entire game just 2 years later? Eddie Hearn was the first to respond, and I'll say it bluntly, it was a very confident and worthy response. The Matchroom boss hastened to put out the fire, saying he was open to the new project and believed it could actually boost excitement in the sport. But at the same time, he pushed back on the idea that boxing was in decline. While he showed respect for his colleagues, Eddie made one thing clear. He's still the best promoter in the business and ready to compete if necessary. He also pointed out that Matchroom was thriving long before the Saudis got involved, with the company growing and expanding and locking down even better deals with broadcasters. Of course, he and the other big shots knew about all this long ago, but none of them would ever openly say what they really think or feel about it. These whales have been in this business for decades, and Dana White, no matter how cool the promoter in MMA is, he is no match for them in boxing, and he has a long, hard road ahead of him to repeat his success in much more difficult circumstances. Yeah, we've all heard the Cinderella story about the UFC 1,000 times. The struggling promotion that turned into a global powerhouse. But let's be real, the UFC had the advantage of being in a brand new, untapped market with rapidly evolving technology. That novelty factor played a huge role in its rise. That's not to take anything away from Dana and the Fertitta brothers. They did their thing. But boxing is a different game. He's not building something from scratch. He's stepping into a space that's already packed with long-standing relationships, powerful promoters, and deep-rooted systems. And when a market is only so big, any new major player is going to shake things up. Some promotions will take bigger hits than others. Take Top Rank, for example. They've worked closely with Turkey as part of Riyadh Season, but their contract with ESPN expires this summer and won't be renewed. So who do you think is going to take their spot? And let's not forget that Nick Khan, the guy who helped broker that Top Rank TV deal, has a lot of influence at ESPN. At the same time, negotiations are happening for the UFC's next broadcast deal, and you can bet TKO will push to include this new boxing project in the agreement. Well, those biggest exhibition fights outside the league format are highly likely to end up on Netflix, which has a relationship with WWE and which was very pleased with the performance of the Jake Paul vs. Tyson fight. Alright, so let's say this new powerhouse carves out a piece of the market and successfully competes fairly with the other promotions. That's something we can wrap our heads around. But what's going to happen to the Alphabet boys? You can bet they're not going down without a fight. They'll almost certainly try to weaponize the Ali Act, which the key players at TKO Holdings have complained about for a while now. And let's not forget, before the UFC merger, they had already spent tens of millions on lawsuits and lobbying efforts to block attempts to bring the Ali Act into MMA, which a group of former UFC fighters pushed. But this time, they don't even have to play dirty. Now they can bypass the law legally. If you recall, at the end of last year, Turkey bought The Ring, one of the most respected boxing magazines in history, with over a century of credibility. And here's the key part. The Ring has its own legitimate championship belts and independent rankings, which actually hold weight in the boxing world thanks to the magazine's reputation. So there's no need for some drawn-out, decade-long plan to change the industry, convince people the old system is outdated, or argue that the endless number of belts has lost its value. Dana and Turkey already have the perfect loophole. They'll just use the Ring's existing infrastructure and wholly cut off any need to deal with sanctioning bodies. They're not here to play by the old rules. They're making their own. The real question is, how are other promoters going to handle this? Will they keep working with Turkey like before, sending over fighters? Maybe they're even open to selling off some contracts from their roster. But then things get messy. If a boxer joins Dana's league, does that mean he gives up his claim to other belts? What if he already holds a title? Does he have to start from scratch? And if so, can he still call himself a WBC or WBO champ outside of fights? And let's be real, what's the actual motivation for fighters to switch to this new league, especially when everything is still getting set up? At some point, any fighter facing this decision will find himself in a pretty funny situation. On one side, you've got Turkey, the guy who, in just 2 years, has become the most generous fight organizer out there. His name is literally a guarantee of massive paydays. But then, the fighter turns his head and sees Dana White standing on the other side. And I can just picture it. Dana slapping down a sweet 50 grand performance of the night bonus for Canelo after he knocks out Crawford in his debut fight. Yeah, at this point, it's pretty clear that this blockbuster fight in September will be the league's big debut event. And here's where things start to get messy. On top of the league format, the organizers still plan to hold big exhibition events, just like they did with Riyadh's season. So young, up-and-coming boxers are more likely to sign with the league, while top stars will keep fighting on major events, where there's already a set minimum payout for stepping into the ring. On one hand, the league will have controlled fighter salaries, offering them access to UFC infrastructure and other perks. But at the same time, those big money fights will keep throwing around tens of millions. For years, he's been loud and clear about what he sees as boxing's biggest problem.
Crazy money.
And whenever people call out the UFC for underpaying fighters, his defense is always the same. Most of the company's profits get reinvested into the sport's future. Otherwise, the whole business model wouldn't work. But boxing is different. It's a sport with a long-established history that doesn't need extra investment to grow. This isn't about building the sport. It's more about investing in the TKO brand itself. Let's be honest, when Dana talks about investing in MMA, what he really means is investing in the UFC brand. After all, the UFC is what put the sport on the map. But now, how's Dana going to look after spending the last 20 years saying boxing was ruined by big money, only to start writing massive checks himself 4 times a year for major events? Even more importantly, how's this gonna sit with UFC fighters? He's already having serious problems in the heavyweight division, where his previous champion left the league first, and then the current one entered into a long confrontation with the UFC. And in both cases, money was the issue. Dana is still struggling to finalize an agreement on a championship fight with Aspinall. Bones' fee is the main holdup, with insiders claiming he seeks $20 to $25 million. Even for a fight, Dana calls the biggest in UFC history. That kind of payout isn't on the table. And now, picture this. Autumn is coming. Negotiations are still underway. Dana is already starting to lose his temper, threatening to take the belt away from Johnny finally. And then, in September, the big launch of the new boxing promotion kicks off, with Dana cutting Canelo a fat $30 million check just to step in the ring. And how do you think Jones will take it? Both fights are guaranteed to raise massive money, definitely more than 1 million pay-per-view buys each. So Jones will look at that and think, why can't they pay me what I'm asking for, what I deserve? In other words, Dana's jumping into big money boxing only makes his negotiations in MMA even more challenging and also makes doubt the rigidity of his position. And with the UFC on the verge of signing a record-breaking TV deal, dragging out these contract talks makes even less sense. If things fall apart, the blame, of course, will fall on the fighter, the same guy Dana was hyping up for many years. It's hard to say what the solution is. Perhaps TKO needs to somehow divide this project into parts. One structure will deal with the league format, in particular borrowing the UFC model, and the other will be responsible for top fights. Leaving the UFC would likely be a more drastic choice for Dana. It's not even about the attitude of MMA fighters to the fees that he will pay to boxers. Honestly, I envy Dana. At 55, I doubt I'll have even half his energy. But no one beats time. There are only 24 hours a day and you can't be everywhere simultaneously. UFC, Power Slap, a million business ventures, meta, boxing, something's gotta give. You can't be everywhere at once. This new venture will demand far more effort, time, and energy than his other projects, which are already running smoothly, especially Power Slap. The UFC is a well-oiled machine. Hunter has been managing internal operations for a long time, while Dana remains the face of the brand, handling media and promotion. But the UFC no longer needs to conquer the market. There is no longer any challenge here. The Dana War has been over for several years. His brainchild is firmly on its feet, being a structural unit of a large business holding company. And in the coming years, and possibly decades, no major leaps and changes are expected here. For someone as driven as Dana, that stability is nothing but boring. Right now, he has an exciting new project that fully captures his attention. A complete shift from the UFC to boxing, a sport he's always been passionate about, seems more possible than ever. Now, let's get back to the second key player in this story. In other sports involved in the Prince's strategy, all the actors and the audience perceive the Saudis exclusively as invaders. But boxing is in such a state that many actually see them as saviors. However, this latest move by Turkey could change that perception completely. All the progress made over the past 2 years could be wiped out because absolute power in any industry never leads to anything good for the end user. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next big video about the UFC empire. I promise there's nothing like it on YouTube. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know what you think about this potential revolution in boxing. Once again, my name is Ruslan, and I think it will be an extremely exciting journey. See you soon.